Carol, we're good to go.
Good to go. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Carol Donovan, and I am your Dallas County Democratic Party Chair. We have a great program today. As you know, we launched our Town Hall series today. We've had 3 so far. This is our 4th. It's going to be a great one with Lorraine Birabil. I'll let you hear further information about Lorraine from our moderator. We have a wonderful moderator. Her name is Cheryl Smith. She is the host on Blog Talk Radio's very popular show, Cheryl's World. She's also the host on The Dotted Line. She's a columnist for Dallas Weekly, and she's the publisher for iMessenger, Garland Journal, and the Texas Metro News. In her spare time, she is the president of the Dallas-Fort Worth Association of Black Journalists, and she is also a member of the Dallas Press Network that has worked with the Dallas County Democratic Party on voter registration. I give you Cheryl Smith.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thanks for this opportunity. If there's anything that we're dealing with is we deal with the COVID-19 and a challenge about getting information out to the electorate. I don't more than to see an increase in the number of people that go to the polls. And Dallas County Democratic Party, thank you for this town hall series. And so we want to get started. And first, before we can get started, we have to thank our sponsors because they realize the importance. And so I'll tell you, our sponsors are Tillotson Law, the Honorable Carol and Dan Donovan, and then our meeting sponsors, the Honorable Terry Barker and Dr. Catalina E. Garcia, and Hamilton and Wingo, LLP. Now, you can add your name to that list also, become a sponsor, get involved with the Dallas Democratic Party because they really need you, need the support, need the work, need the bodies, and need to get to the polls. And someone who wants to make sure that you get to the polls and would love, I think State Representative Lorraine Birabil would love to see something that we haven't seen for a while. It would be great if we saw 80% turnout.
Yeah,
Let me tell you about our representative there. Good evening. And Representative Lorraine Birabil, lifelong Democrat and dedicated public servant. Her path to public service began long ago by following a powerful example in her life. And this is really interesting because that powerful example is her father. And she credits him for instilling in her persistence and commitment to service. Now, as an immigrant single parent, there were challenges, but he was one of a handful of Black scientists at UT Southwestern. And like many single parents, he found a way to be present for his child while also being a provider. He was always available whenever Lorraine needed him, cooked for her every night, and still found a way to volunteer for causes he cared about. Lorraine followed that example by serving in various capacities at federal, state, and local levels of government. Most notably, he has worked with Annie's List, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, Congressman Mark Vesey, former State Senator Wendy Davis, former Mayor Mike Rawlings, County Judge Clay Jenkins, over a dozen current and former judges, as well as labor unions to shape legislation and policy for the benefit of working people. In her free time, that's a joke, Lorraine serves Dallas residents in other ways. In addition to mentoring young people interested in public service, she has been a Democratic precinct chair and delegate to the Texas Democratic Party State Convention for over a decade. Lorraine has also served on several boards, including the Dallas County Citizen Election Advisory Committee. She was born and raised in North Texas and has called Dallas and House District 100 home for 2 decades. She earned a Doctor of Jurisprudence from Texas A&M University School of Law And prior to law school, Lorraine graduated from the University of North Texas, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree in biology with a minor in chemistry and a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science. She is married to Joseph Amison, and they are raising their daughter Natalia in the Buckner Terrace neighborhood of Dallas. Now, I have to tell you, Representative Birabil, every time I say Lorraine, I'm courtesy titles, and I just love to give, representative, I love to give that courtesy title on it. So with all due respect, I was saying Lorraine, but we're gonna get started, and I want everybody to join me in welcoming Representative Lorraine Birabil, House District 100.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that warm introduction. As was mentioned, my name is Lorraine Birabil, and I'm extremely proud to represent my neighbors in the State House in Austin. As Cheryl mentioned, I've lived here for 20 years. I'm the only candidate in this race who was eligible to serve from day one. And I'm really proud of the support we've been able to earn so far. I've earned support from Democratic clubs, precinct chairs such as myself, community leaders, and elected officials alike. They're all supporting me because I have a proven track record of service. For over a decade, I've been working on the issues that matter without a title. Things like justice reform, things like voting rights, healthcare, and education. It is because of that record that people have placed their trust and confidence in me, and the weight of that is not lost upon me. We have 150 state legislators, but only one can be elected to represent our neighborhood in the state house. And I'm proud to be the people's choice, because in all actuality, the endorsement that matters most is that of my neighbors, the constituents of District 100, who have voted for me 3 times to represent them in the state house. And I don't take that support for granted, and I'm continuing to earn and keep that support every single day. With that being said, I want to give you a little bit about what I've been doing. But before I get to that, I want to make sure I explain why I decided to seek public office. Some of you may know this story, but it is my reason, and so I tell it. I have a daughter, as Cheryl mentioned. She is going to be 1 year old actually on Tuesday, and she never got to meet her grandmother. Her grandmother died a month and 4 days before she was born because of the Medicaid gap. She was a registered nurse. At 64 years old, she was too young to qualify for Medicare, and at being a registered nurse, she didn't earn enough to pay out of pocket, but she earned too much to qualify for standard Medicaid. Sadly, her story is not an anomaly. We have 1 million other Texans who are just like her, who should have coverage that don't, because healthcare is a right. It is not a privilege. And so thinking upon what we're currently going through now and the crisis that we find ourselves in, it only further highlights why we need to make sure that everyone has access to care so they can get the treatment when they need it. I've been out here fighting. And one thing that my constituents do know about me is I am a fighter. I was happy to sue the state of Texas when the state passed a discriminatory voter ID law. In that case, I not only served as an intervener and put my name on the lawsuit, I helped find the witnesses. I helped with their depositions. I did everything that I could to make sure that the suit was successful. And we were successful. Through that lawsuit, through the testimony of that witness, we were able to prove the case that the Texas voter ID law was discriminatory, in fact, not just an accusation. And so these are things that I'm extremely proud of, but they're also markers of the kind of person I am and frankly, my character, that I'm never going to give up on our community. So for me, it doesn't matter whether it's a case of a single injustice or a broad injustice in the fact that everyone doesn't have access to the care they need. I'm going to continue that fight. In terms of what I've been working on since being elected, I was sworn in February after the special election to fill the unexpired term of our now mayor, Eric Johnson. And although I haven't been in office very long, I'm really proud of the accomplishments we've been able to have so far. You may have heard about some of the orders that came down recently. I wrote a letter to the governor and strongly advocated that grocery workers be included as frontline workers. that is now the case. They are included as frontline workers and entitled to those same protections, such as access to child care, access to testing, things of that nature. Additionally, I signed on to support and ensure that SNAP benefits would be able to be used online in a federal pilot program. That is now, has been granted, and people who are on SNAP benefits do have the availability to go and use that online portal. So that was recently approved, and I'm looking forward to people being able to utilize that function and stay safe while we are sheltering in place. And finally, I was one of the first representatives to call out the governor on the, in my opinion, unconstitutional ban on jail release. And a court later agreed with me. And so these are some of the key accomplishments we've had in just in a few weeks of serving, and I'm really proud of that, but we're gonna continue the fight. We've also conducted a number of town halls and information sessions for the district. We had a general town hall where I pulled together leaders in our community, including Congressman Mark Vesey, County Judge Clay Jenkins, Dr. Huang of the Dallas County Health and Human Services, as well as Dr. Michael Hinojosa, to prepare the community for what was coming, the shelter in place order that we're dealing with today. Also, I did a small business workshop that is targeted at small businesses and nonprofit organizations, helping them access the federal funding. That was actually done before the funds ran out because I wanted to make sure the community had all the information they need to try to move forward and qualify for those funds. I also, as part of that, had Texas Workforce Commission on that explained some of the options for employers so they can keep their employee on the payroll if they were facing struggling times through a program called the Shared Work Program. And finally, we also had a senior town hall where we focused on seniors, making sure they had access to the resources they needed through organizations like the Senior Source and the Dallas Area Agency on Aging. That's just a short list of some of the things we've been working on. Obviously, we are working on doing casework. We literally are handling hundreds of cases of constituents who need help, and we are there for them. And we're going to continue to do that.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are just joining us, that is State Representative Lorraine Birabil, and we're going to be taking your questions. I have a few for you, but we want you to submit your questions and just know this is the Dallas Democratic Party, and this is the Town Hall Series, and this is brought to you by sponsors Tillerson Law, the Honorable Carol and Dan Donovan, Honorable Terry Barker, Dr. Catalina Garcia, and Hamilton Wingo Law Firm. And in order for the Democratic Party to continue bringing programming like this, we need you to sign up and become a sponsor as well today. So let's get your questions, submit your questions to us. You talked about Representative being a fighter, and people are waiting to see the Democrats fight because there's a big fight going on and there's some big wins. And so when you look at being a fighter and also bringing the Democratic Party together to increase voter turnout, what are your thoughts when folks are trying to live right now? Absolutely. They're trying to make it. When you think about Dallas, when you think about the state of Texas, how $1.7 billion already for unemployment. So there are so many issues that people are worried about. So why should residents of Dallas County vote for you? And what can you tell them about why you're the best candidate, why they had confidence in you and you're sitting in the seat now, why they should return to the polls and vote for you again?
Absolutely. So I mentioned some of the accomplishments we've had in the short time that I have been sworn in. So I won't belabor that. But one thing that I did not bring up earlier that I think is really important is the fact that I'm the only candidate in this race that has a track record of also beating the Republicans up and down the ballot throughout this state. I mentioned earlier that we have 150 state legislators, and obviously we only get to choose one to represent our neighborhood. When I talk about beating the Republicans, it wasn't just at the courthouse when I served as an intervener in the voter ID lawsuit. At the ballot box for several election cycles, part of my job was to make sure, and I literally went on leave to do this, to help make sure that we beat the Republicans. Whether that was in 2010 when I helped with a coordinated effort to make sure that we knocked the top 100 precincts in Dallas County, we did that and we won. Whether it was making sure that someone like Congressman Mark Vesey continued, worked with him, and I managed the general program to make sure that even though he didn't have what anyone would call was a legitimate opponent in the general election, we still worked hard to make sure that people like Terry Meza would get elected in HD 105, which is one of the seats we have to hold. And last election cycle in 2018, I served as Better Work statewide outreach director. And in that role, I was intricately involved in many of the 12 seats that we picked up around this state. And so I have a proven track record of not only working hard for people in District 100, but also working hard for people across our state to make sure we have the representation that we deserve. And because of that work, we are now in striking distance of electing a Democratic speaker. And that is one of my main goals, is to have someone in this seat who is going to make sure that we have what we need and the votes we need in the legislature to get the job that we want to get done. We still have lots of work to do. HB 3 in the last session was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough. I would like to see full day universal pre-K. That is something I think would make a meaningful difference in the lives of the youth in our district, but across our state. But again, those things don't happen if we don't have the votes to do it. And again, I'm the only person in the race with a proven track record of having done so already. And so you don't have to worry about what I will do as an elected official. You can look at what I've done before I was elected. And regardless of the outcome of this election, and I am confident as long as we continue to work hard, we'll be successful. But I was a public servant before this, before I had a title, and I will continue to do so as your state representative.
Thank you for that. And thanks for your question out there. And here's another question for you. Time to submit vote by mail ballot. We're dealing with across the country voter suppression. Seriously, I mean, when you talk about telling someone that they can vote at the police station, what is that going to do to voters? And when you're dealing with people, this is COVID-19, an era of COVID-19. People are leery about coming out. How are you going to get them out? And are you going to encourage folks to submit vote by mail ballot requests?
So I've mentioned some background about my Democratic credentials, and I am a lifelong Democrat. But my experience in terms of myself compared to any of my opponents that have run in this race, and I'm now on my 4th election, none of them can match the successful track record I've had against the Republicans. And so what my plan is as a representative is to bring all that skills and experience to bear to make sure that voters in this district are well educated about the process of voting. As you know, Cheryl, we may have an opportunity to allow everyone to vote by mail, which I think is a great step in the right direction because the Republicans have had a track record of trying to make voting harder. We already know that there is an issue with voter turnout and voter apathy. And so we should definitely be making voting easier, not harder. And so with that, have done that in the past in much larger areas and much larger districts. And I'm certainly going to do that for this House district.
Okay, thank you for your question. And here's the next for your answer. And thank you for your question out there. And please submit your questions and we'll try to get to as many as we can during this time. Let's go to the next question. And we can start increasing funding for our public schools. There are definitely some issues with public schools. And we're seeing if one thing COVID-19 is doing, one of the many things it's doing is showing the disparities in a number of areas. And when you look at 40% of the Dallas Independent School District students don't have Wi-Fi, don't have access to it. When you look at the challenges that students are facing with what happens when you have only one computer in the house, but you have 3 school-aged children and mom and dad have to work from home, or mom or dad. Funding for our public schools. What is your position? What would you like to see happen? And what are you going to be working to make happen?
So this is something I have talked about on the campaign trail. We know that our state A vast majority of our funding comes from sales tax as well as property tax. And I think that it might be disheartening for the public to know, but only 1% of businesses are audited for sales tax. So when you go to the store and you buy your bag of chips and you pay 8 cents tax on that bag of chips, a lot of people assume that that fund is going to be transferred back to the state. And it is required by law to be transferred back to the state, but in reality is not always transferred back to the state. As I mentioned a second ago, only 1% of businesses for sales tax are audited. That means 99% of them are not audited, and we have no way of knowing if those funds were remitted back. And all too often, when these businesses are audited, there is a shortfall found for funds that were not reported back or sent back to the state. And so there's a tremendous potential for revenue that is completely untapped through that sales tax process, not by creating a new tax, but simply enforcing the sales tax law that is already on the books. And so for me, one of my priorities as a state legislator is going to have better oversight over the comptroller's office, making sure that office has all the resources they need to make sure that we can go after those unrecouped revenues for our state. And given the crisis that we're in right now, it's going to be even more important that we do that. Secondly, once we address this sales tax shortfall, we can then look at some property tax relief. We know that historically, I'll say back in the day, the state typically had funded about 50% of schools. Now that number is closer to about 30%. And so the whole reason why we went through HB3 was to try to put some equilibrium back in the system, but we're not quite there yet. If we address sales tax the way we need to, that means that the local school districts don't have to tax as much to get the same level of funding that they need to pay for schools. And so one of the things that I think that we really need to be looking at, and one of the things I'm going to be fighting for in the next session, is to make sure that we have appropriate oversight to ensure that we are recovering all the sales tax revenue that's available. And of course, I am open to unique and interesting ways to find revenue. But certainly we need to definitely ensure the laws that are already on the books and make sure that this unrecouped sales tax is actually sent back to the state, because it is the people's money.
Okay, when you talked about we're holding businesses accountable, do you think this will have an adverse effect on small businesses?
No, and thank you for that question. And the reason why I say the answer is no is because that sales tax revenue was never a part of the business's revenue. So when a business comes up with, I'm working with my suppliers, I don't know what the number is, but let's just say that the number is they pay 50 cents for a bag of chips, but they charge $1. Their margin is not supposed to be the 8 cents on top of the extra 50 cents they were making on each bag of chip. That 8 cents is something that in order for them to operate in the state of Texas, they have stated, I'm going to lawfully operate within the state. And as part of those rules means also following the requirements for sales tax. When these businesses develop relationships with suppliers, many times they're buying these products with a sales tax permit that allows them not to pay for sales tax on the purchase of those goods. So at the point of sale, when the people pay for that, the people's money should be returned back to the state. And so that's specifically what I'm referencing. This would not create a burden on small businesses because this is something that they're already supposed to be doing. But on top of that, you actually reminded me of something in a conversation that I had with a small business owner. Some struggles that some small business people have had in compliance is for lack of having the information, but also having the lack of infrastructure. And so one of the things that I would propose and implement is that these business incubators that we have already in place, that we have acts and make sure that the businesses that are participating or the businesses in the neighborhood have access to some of the professional services through those existing incubators. And that will also help with compliance as well.
I'd like to stay on businesses for a moment, even though and we have a number of questions coming in because we're looking at, former Ambassador Ron Kirk talked about the importance of small businesses when he was in the Obama administration. And small businesses are suffering. You saw a stimulus package where big business was getting the bulk of the money. And then there are certain issues, and we're dealing with banks that have said, you don't have a loan with us, you can't apply for a loan, so therefore you don't get any type of relief. And there are businesses closing in your district. And what do you say to them? I know the first thing everyone says is, please go and file. They were saying, earlier this week, file quickly and try to get in line and try to understand what the process is. This is an education process. And I know that next week, Senator West is dealing with Small Business Administration, and you've dealt with it. And how do we help these small businesses, the ones that make up our communities?
Thank you, Cheryl. I could not agree more when I say that small businesses are the engine. They literally are the lifeblood of our economy. They hire people who live in our community. Those people who live in our community are able to pay their rent and pay their mortgages because of these jobs. And not to mention the small business owners having a positive impact on our neighborhood by providing stability. And so for me, that was the whole reason why I hosted the Small Business Nonprofit Stimulus Workshop, because I wanted to make sure that businesses in our community had access to the information in order to qualify. I do agree with the concerns people have said. That, in my opinion, has a lot to do with the implementation, not only the way that it was drafted in some ways, but also the implementation in terms of the rulemaking process, the regulatory process that goes into from the time that a bill becomes law through Congress and signed by the executive. But once it gets to the agency, there's a whole other set of rulemaking process that determines how the law on its face is actually applied. And I feel like in this situation, the devil is certainly in the details, and some of the way that that was drafted in terms of the regulatory end of this, and also the implementation on it and some of the banks led to an outcome that none of us wanted to see. And so I fully support the Congress approving additional funds for this. And I do support them looking at more smaller community banks to make sure that small businesses do have access to these funds. But I also believe we need to go one step further. At the state level, I have not seen the kind of relief that I would like to see for small businesses. And yes, the federal government is probably likely going to have to do the heavy lifting on this. However, I would be remiss to say that if there was ever a rainy day, this is it. And so perhaps whenever we go into session, and I would like to see a special session because I don't think we can adequately address this crisis without going into a special session, but in light of the likelihood that the governor is unwilling to call a special session, we're going to have to seriously look at this when we get to session in 2021, and whether we can look at the Economic Stabilization Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, to see what kind of relief we can have there. In the interim, I did sign on and urge the governor and the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court to make sure that we try to give businesses some of the relief we've seen on the residential level. So for example, evictions have been halted, foreclosures have been halted. I would like to see that same types of relief at the state level for businesses, small businesses as well, because many times they have mortgages too. They're paying rent too. And at this time, I do not want a business having to decide, do I have to lay off my staff or do I have to pay this mortgage payment? I would like for our state, at least to look at very seriously, and I asked the governor to do this, just as some of the other things that I've worked on that have been successful so far, to put a moratorium for these small businesses to provide some immediate relief that they can feel. That's not based on whether they have a great relationship with a bank.
That's really important to know, because someone just mentioned to me they own a lot of property, but they can't do anything about making people pay. So how do they get paid? How do they get respite in a system that is that needs a lot of help? We're going to keep going. For those of you who are just joining us, Dallas County Democratic Party Town Hall Series, brought to you by a number of sponsors, and we'll share their names with you. And we're going to keep sharing them and encouraging you to help also. This is a good way to get information out, and I appreciate taking the time, Representative, to address constituents. And the series sponsors are Tillotson Law. I lost that on the screen. Okay, let me go to my screen and get it. I know the Honorable Carol and Dan Donovan, and the Honorable Terry Barker, Dr. Catalina E. Garcia, and Hamilton Wingo, LLP. Those are the sponsors, but guess what? We can add your name to the sponsor list as well. And we're getting ready. We're trying to get people acclimated, just even thinking about it. You mentioned a lot of issues, Representative, that are directly tied to folks also not only voting, but filling out their census forms.
Absolutely. And I had, and I'm not sure if he's still on or if he was able to join us, but Edward Turner with the city of Dallas had planned to do a census presentation. And
I'm
so,
here.
okay, wonderful. So I just want to, and I don't want to steal his thunder, so I'm not going to, but I would be remiss to say how important the census is. We must make sure that everyone in our community is counted. And obviously I'm focused on District 100, our community. However, even if you don't live in District 100, we have redistricting coming up. As it's discussed earlier, we know that we have currently a state leadership that is intent on marginalizing our community, and we will not be fully counted unless we make sure that we are counted in fact. Being counted on the census has a big impact in terms of our funding, whether it's funding for schools, healthcare, rec centers, all kinds of funding. And so I'll let you moderate, Ms. Cheryl, but I see that Edward is on right now in case he wants to give a quick presentation on the census.
We are actually out of time. We were only allotted for 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. And so that will be coming to you, but it is an issue, and I think that even hearing it from you, Representative Bill, that when you're talking about the census, because some people are leery, they don't want folks in their business, and I know that working with Myth Curvin and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, they did a video of just how people respond, because people don't want to give out information because they think that you're going to get the information going to be used for other things, to determine their status, to determine if they have any warrants, a number of other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And there's isn't a trust for the government. And I could talk about a whole other show for talking about the lack of trust in politicians and the messages that we're getting from folks. And as we get ready to go to some of the other questions, how do you feel an obligation to help rebuild trust, if there ever was, in politicians?
Well, to be honest, just, that's how I am. I really don't like the word politician just because of the connotation, sadly, that some have about the word. I don't view myself as a politician, even though I am technically an elected official. I see myself as a servant. I have been serving the community for over a decade in some sort of role, whether it was through federal, state, and local service, whether that was service as a precinct chair, whether that was chairing the 23rd Senatorial Convention. It's about service for me. And I think that I speak for every person that lives in this district, that we want to make sure that our neighborhoods are strong, that our community is healthy, that we survive this crisis, because we need to survive this crisis. I'm a Methodist, so I had to throw that in there. But I want to make sure that we all get through this together, and together, as long as we work together, we will. I want constituents to know that I work for you, I serve you, and that's why I prefer to be called a public servant. I can be reached at both my Dallas office as well as my Capital office. The Capital office number is 512-463-0586, and our Dallas district office number is 214-565-5663. If you need help, I know that people are having a hard time getting through to Texas Workforce Commission. We're helping with those cases too. If you need help, please do not hesitate to call. And also, we have set up a COVID-specific website just to provide information on resources that are out there. That website is HD like House District 100.org. And so if you go there, we have lots of different information for working parents who are watching their kids while they work, seniors, small businesses, pretty much any group that you may fall into. We have information there for you, and I'm here to serve you.
Do you have information for those parents who are tired of homeschooling?
Yes, we do. And ironically, our home has also been converted to a nursery school as well. I certainly empathize with parents who are having to be teachers, but I think also hopefully we will also come out of this with a greater appreciation for teaching as a profession. It truly is a profession. And we've got our work cut out for us, but I'm going to continue to work hard to make sure our schools are fully funded and our teachers get the pay and the respect that they deserve.
Definitely. You mentioned a lot of experience that you have. What experience best prepared you for the Texas legislature? Which one do you feel specifically?
That's really hard to say. I feel like to be successful as a legislator, you really have to have a heart for people. And so I don't think that is something that can be taught. I think that's something you just have to have. But one thing I will say as a legislator, it's important that you're not training on the job. We are in a crisis right now. And the crisis that we're dealing with has implications at all levels of government. And you have to know how the legislative process works. I've worked in a legislative office, and so I know how that process works, how to actually get something passed into law. You have to actually know how to work with the different offices. So for example, right now, the governor as the chief executive has declared a state of emergency. And so we are not able to pass law because we're not in session. So you have to understand how these different agencies work together in order to still get the policies that you want to see, such as the ones we were able to successfully gain access to and ultimately take effect in the state.
All good things have to come to an end. And I have so many questions, and there's some really good questions coming from folks here. We could go on, and we probably could go on a lot more if some of the folks were sponsors and supporting the Dallas County Democratic Party Town Hall series. And there's so much. I think this is a quick one. Do you support legalizing cannabis?
I believe that our state really should look at doing some of the things that other states have done, like Colorado, like California. One of the things that I do want to see if we move in that direction, and I'm definitely open to doing so, is making sure that there is MBE inclusion in that process. All too often, many of the other states that have done so, our community has been left out of that. In so many ways, in the states where it is not lawful, we are in the undermarket, right? And so we need to make sure that all regardless of the color of their skin.
Definitely. I know it's really have your statements and a whole lot more. I am so sorry. And I hope the sponsors appreciate it. Tillerson Law, the Honorable Carol and Dan Donovan, the Honorable Terry Barker, Dr. Catalina Garcia, and Hamilton Wingo, LLP. It came so quickly, but we're gonna have to get together again. Thank you for those of you who have been listening and tuning in. None other than Representative Lorraine Birabil, 100. And
Thank you so much.
I'll turn it back over to our party chair. Carol, are you there? Because I could keep going. There are a number.
I think we're having audio issues on her end.
Oh, so
but we are out of time, unfortunately. These are very, very short town halls. So join us next week, though. We've got Railroad Commissioner candidates Krista Castaneda and Roberto Alonso at 2 p.m. And then we have U.S. Senate candidate MJ Hagar at 4 p.m.
Okay, and do we need to give the date, however, for elections so that people will keep it in mind?
The runoff for the Democratic primary, and that's for all the races, Senate, Railroad Commissioner, District 100, Congressional 24, is July 14th, and early voting will begin July 6th.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.